Welcome to Unboxing History. I'm Christine Hopkins, a local author and Galveston expert, and
I'm Jodi Wright-Gidley, director of the Galveston County Museum.
every month the Galveston County Museum unboxes an artifact that's part of the museum's collection as part of our Unboxing History podcast. So, Jodi, what's our treasure this month, our artifact?
Our artifact for the month is a bucket, but it's not just any old bucket. This is a fire bucket. So this bucket was used by fire departments and firemen and bucket brigades in the early 1900s. Early fire buckets would have been wood and then leather and then metal. And so this would have been used, there's a fire, we need to get water to put out the fire. So people would line up and pass buckets along, getting water from a water source, passing it to the fire. So the bucket never needed to sit down. It has a cone-shaped bottom, never needed to sit down. The other thing that made this bucket, specifically for fire buckets, is that it was cone-shaped, and so no one would take off and use it for something else. It was unattractive to be used for any other reason. So this was, designated fire bucket. And the other thing that has been said is that the cone shape could have been used to break ice if there was icy water around that you needed to pull your water from. So that's the cone-shaped bucket, fire bucket. It's pretty rare. And so this one has been in the museum's collection for a very long time.
Wow. Well, this is really a unique piece. I've never seen a bucket like that. I think most people, I would say 99.9% of people have never seen a bucket that was shaped like a cone versus a flat bucket. So we're going to be talking to a guest who is an expert on fires in Galveston, as well as the life and what it was like for the fire stations at the time.
All right.
One of the wonderful things about Galveston is that we have several local authors that are experts in a certain area of history related to Galveston. So today we have James Anderson. He is the author of Galveston Burning, A History of the Fire Department and Major Conflagrations. This is his book. So James, what just made you write a book about fire, the fires in Galveston? What was the motivation?
It was... I've always been interested in, history. And when I was giving tours, we would talk about the fires of Galveston, but you can't find one source that just covers all the fires. And when I started researching, I found the last real book, even which touched on any of it, was written in 1926.
Wow.
And so it was like, okay, it needs updated. And I started finding more stuff that wasn't even in books. And so that's kind of where the book came from.
It's an important history, and I think these things really changed Galveston and changed what the island looked like. And you always read about these big fires in big, huge cities like Chicago, San Francisco. And so, to learn how it impacted us, I think is so important. So what type of measures did city leaders in Galveston and probably other cities around the county as well as across the country, what types of things did they do to protect the community and its citizens?
Kind of some of the biggest things is first they would establish fire limits for their town. So they would say within this certain district, we can't have anything new built that would be extremely flammable. Anything that was older that could come into flame, we're going to move it further out. We're going to require newer building codes. We would establish the bell towers so that way we could ring if there was a fire. They would also create, maps that would show what buildings were there, what they were made of, how tall, if there was a cistern nearby, what the water sources were, various things like that.
And I was reading in your book about those fire maps, and the company was called
The Sanborn Fire Insurance Company.
Okay. And they still continue to do maps, I read.
Yes, they are still current. In fact, most of the ones that I used, you can actually find online. But they continue doing them to this day. And what's unique about them is when you look at it, of course, it's an overall map of the city. And then you will go into a certain section. It will show you the street, the lot, show you the building. It will show you like in color, whatever the color is. If it's red, it's brick. If it's yellow, it's wood. And then it will tell you how many stories tall the building is. It will tell you if there's a water source nearby.
Wow.
Gives you all sorts of really unique stuff. Even if you're not studying fires, it's still a unique book to find, info on.
Well, and so people could always research maps in the past for their own city. They could look it up on the Library of Congress.
Library of Congress, the one I go is the Perry Castaneda map collection with the University of Texas.
Okay, Perry Castaneda. So if you're interested in that history, then look that up. But no, I was fascinated because it said wood, brick, where the water was. And I mean, it's a lot of detail, especially given the time. And I can't imagine what it took to do that. How often did they do those maps?
They were sporadic. So I know, like for Galveston, we have the 1877 map. There's 1885 map, 1889, 1912, 1947. So it was more like the city would decide that they wanted to have a map done.
Maybe based on development.
It's like development and growth of the city type thing. Is when a map would be done.
You know, there's these beautiful pictures of the old fire stations in your book, some of which that came from the Galveston County Museum. So tell us, like, what fire stations, what were they like? Where were they on the island? And are any of those buildings still around?
Early fire stations, very early on, the fire stations were really more just for like the storage of the equipment.
That's interesting.
There really wasn't much to the building other than just, okay, we got a place to store the fire truck or, the equipment. Later on, they would, of course, incorporate like bunk rooms and stuff like that so the men could stay at the firehouse. And so in case of fire, they could quickly make it to the fire. We do still have several of the originals on the island. Of course, our most favorite is the Star Estate, which is over, I think it's like 29th and Market, that has just been restored.
Oh, yes. Okay.
There's one, it's actually over at 16th and K, which is a private residence now, the originals. We also have, if I remember correctly, there's one that's more recent. It's actually over on Avenue P, and it's now an apartment complex. But it was sold off about the 1950s. But I think my favorite one, when you're driving down Broadway, it's called the Apostolic Firehouse. And it is actually Firehouse number 6 that was sold off, and that's where one of our ghost stories is as well.
Wow, and that's on Broadway?
Yeah, that's on Broadway.
Where on Broadway?
I think if I remember correctly, it's around about 40th and Broadway.
Okay, I think I've seen it before. Wow, that's interesting. And the one he's talking about on Market, there's a part of Galveston that is called West Market, where there's some different restaurants and different things on that side. And that building was really falling apart. So I'm glad someone bought it and is working to restore it.
Yeah, the Galveston Historic Foundation had gone in and, protected it by rebuilding the building, saving the front and all. And now is selling it off so somebody can complete the interior restoration.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank goodness, thank goodness. So in your book, you really break down the different districts of Galveston, the commercial district, the wharves district, the residential, and the warehouse district.
Yeah.
So overall, I know there's many fires, but which fire sticks out in your mind as something that really changed Galveston?
Now, we could easily say it was this fire, but I think most people would say it was the 1885 fire. I mean, because that fire, literally destroys 42 blocks of the city. There's 568 homes that are lost. And it starts from pretty much the harbor going all the way to the Gulf. So it stretches completely across the city. So all walks of life were affected by this fire.
Because it went from commercial all the way to residential all the way up.
And so with that fire, it really kind of destroyed the big portion of the center of the city. And so the city had to figure out, how do we stop that from ever happening again? So I think that fire really caused the city kind of look back at, okay, if we're going to be building all these magnificent homes and structures, what can we do to protect ourselves? And I think that was kind of one of the biggest things, because unfortunately, shortly after that fire, the city did go in and they had decided that we need to do fireproof building materials. And so, houses need to be made of stone or brick, and, we don't want to have anything of wood anymore. If it is wood, it has to have a fire break and stuff like that. But they also required that the roofs were non-flammable. And so they required at that point that we had to use slate shingles, which would later come back to haunt them in 1900.
Yes. And for people that don't know, tell them what was the implications of having a slate roof in the 1900 storm.
Yeah, with the high winds of the 1900 storm, these slate shingles are being ripped from roofs and they're being hurled through the air. People are being maimed and decapitated, people being killed, and the city of Galveston realizes very shortly after the storm that this requirement could come back to really be a big, thing that would haunt them for their life. So shortly after the storm, you do see a retraction in the newspaper of the requirement is no longer slate shingles. Speaking of slate, when Hurricane Ike happened in 2008, one of my neighbors had a slate roof.
And which is kind of surprising after all those years, but they had a slate roof. And I was in my backyard looking around, and there was a piece of slate, and it was just sliced right into my neighbor's house. You know, it's pretty amazing when you think about the power of nature and wind and what that would have been like in 1900 for one, but that just power. But, with the fire of 1885, how quickly did it travel? Do you know?
The 1885 fire, it traveled pretty much overnight. Like it started around about 6 or 7 o'clock of the evening. And by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, most of the city's engulfed. It was out by about 7, 8 o'clock that next morning, but it had burned overnight. And it's because we had a very high wind blowing. We had very low water pressure, and just by the time the fire department could really even try to get to it, it was already out of control.
And it started at which building?
It actually started at 16th and Strand at the Vulcan Ironworks. And just kind of billowed from there and then worked its way across.
Well, and one of the things that I read about in your book was that making the decision to pave the streets helped with response. And I don't know, were the streets paved yet by 1885?
By 1885, we had a lot of the streets that it wasn't really true pavement. Some of our earliest streets were actually crushed oyster shell. We had Market Street where they had creosoted logs that were put in. And by about probably, I'd say by the 1885, early 1900, we started to kind of get the bricks and stuff, where it's actually a much smoother way. Because the reason what happened was one of the early fires in 1857, the Ursuline Convent catches fire, and the fire truck is racing to get there. It gets bogged down in the sand and actually breaks its axle and never makes it to the convent, and the convent burns.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Oh, that's just terrible. And you think about the lives that are lost and, and so forth. And I think we talked about it a little bit, but one of the things that they set up early on was a warning system for fires.
Early on, the first thing was we had a fire watch tower.
A fire watch tower.
And so that was put at the market house. And whenever there was a fire, the bell was supposed to be rung to let them know. Unfortunately, it kind of fell out of favor very quickly. And really, it started being used just for the start of the workday and the end of the workday. But the fire telegraph system became the more important part. Because what they did is they actually strung wires across the city. And they would have it set up where there would be a box on the street near to where the fire was, and it would correspond to a wall in the firehouse. Even the fire chief had one in his office, in his house, and the bar. That when it would ring, it would show where the fire was. Now, it may not show the exact building, but it shows kind of like the street corner. So they could know that they need to get to that block in order to get to the fire.
That's pretty amazing.
The very first fire alarm system, it was hit or miss, because it didn't quite work as good as it's supposed to, but over time it became much better.
And how many of those boxes were in that first system?
The first system, I've read notes here and there that say there was about 70.
Wow.
But over time, I think it got to over 200. A few times we had fires where even though the box was set, the fire alarm never rang. So sometimes we were running to the firehouse saying, there's a fire, you need to get here type thing.
Wow, that's really interesting. And, so you're talking about the fire of 1885, the devastation, and then there's been so many fires, of course, in our history. But, your book focuses on a chapter, which I love, is historic buildings.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some buildings that you just look at the pictures and you're thinking, oh, my gosh, I can't believe that was lost in a fire. So which buildings in Galveston stand out to you that were lost due to a fire?
Probably one of my favorites is going to be the Beach Hotel. It was such a big, grand hotel right there sitting on the beach. The fact that it went down probably in less than 18 minutes, because it was a completely wooden building.
18 minutes?
Yeah, it may be more than that, but it wasn't very much longer. But completely wooden structure, completely burned. And even after the fire in the surf, you see all of the cedar pilings are just still sitting in the surf after the building burned. You had the electric pavilion, which was actually built just prior to the hotel, which was supposed to be used for the Singerfest singing festival, which had come to town. And due to a short circuit in the coffee maker, it actually caused the building to catch fire.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it had only been in the area for 2 years, and it burned to the ground. But it was supposed to be a big kind of like amphitheater for various musical fills. But I think of all of them, the one that I kind of miss the most would actually be probably our, I just went blank on it.
Harmony Hall?
Thank you. Harmony Hall would definitely be the favorite because of the fact it was just such a beautiful, unique structure. And it stood right in the middle of town. Of course, it was originally built as like a hall for the Jewish singing group. And they found that it was just too expensive to maintain. So they sold it off to the Galveston Business College. The business college keeps it, of course, the 1900 storm because they realized just how expensive it is to maintain. So it's sold off to Scottish Rite. And the Scottish Rite has it. And unfortunately, after they get their organ repaired and that's being put on the 3rd floor, they're downstairs playing billiards and reading. Unbeknownst, the organ catches fire, catches the building on fire, and the only reason they know is the firemen rush in to tell them your building's on fire.
Wow.
So it burns in February of 1928.
Well, and there's an interesting tidbit about that building.
Yeah, the neat thing about it, and most people don't realize, is the current building, which was built just shortly after, houses the original marble staircase to Harmony Hall. After the fire, the staircase was actually removed and put across the street as they were clearing and rebuilding. And as they were rebuilding, they moved the staircase in, kind of repositioned it and put it in the new building.
And that's a solid building.
Oh, yeah.
What's the most interesting thing that you found when you were doing your research for this book? What surprised you?
Researching, there's always some fun stuff that you come across. And at the time probably wasn't fun to find out. But I think the most intriguing was when I found out that during the volunteer period, we had several volunteers that when the fire company would arrive at a fire, shortly after they would get paid for, in either like in a silver trumpet, a nice dinner, or they get monetary. So there was a couple firefighters that decided, well, if we're going to get paid, we're going to go set our own fires. So that way our company can arrive on time, we can put it out, and we can get paid for it.
Oh, my gosh. It's sad, but I guess desperate people, unfortunately. But, well, thank you so much, James. I mean,
You're very welcome.
This is an interesting history that people don't necessarily think about. And, I mean, it's important because these things, these buildings that are lost and the impact that these fires have. Oh, I know one more thing that I wanted to talk about was in addition to the 1885 fire in Galveston County, there was another very impactful event that really changed one of the cities nearby. Do you want to talk about Texas City?
No, absolutely. With Texas City, of course, we had the major explosion, and, the fire department had been there at the first explosion. When the second one happened, of course, it really decimated the city.
And for people that don't know, what year was that and so forth?
It was April 16th, 1947.
1947.
So when the fire hits, most of the fire department there's nobody to respond to the fire. So the closest is Galveston, and we have a fireboat. So we're able to fight the fire from the water. So it's our fireboat that is actually in some of the original images that shows them fighting the Montanado plant fire. And so you'll see, and it's actually the city of Galveston, which we had purchased in 1930, that is there putting that fire out.
Well, and with the fireboats, do they still use fireboats? Tell us about what happened to these important tools at the time.
Our fireboats, we really only had two fireboats in our history. We had bought the tugboat, the Charles Clark, and retrofitted it, turned it into the very first fireboat. And it was doing good, but it was starting to get aged, and it was time to replace. So we had spent quite a bit of money to buy the city of Galveston, which was a brand new fireboat, had done very well, had its own pier, everything. Pier 23 is where it's at. But over time, it needed to be repaired. And at the time, the city's like, it just doesn't make any sense for us to spend this money on the repair of the ship. So they literally let it sit at the pier, and it sat and just started to rot away. And eventually, it was sold for like $5,000 for scrap.
Oh,
and
my gosh.
for the longest time, Galveston didn't have a fireboat. And a lot of the local companies started setting up their own little fireboat. Now we have more like a rescue boat, but it's not really a true fireboat.
Gotcha.
As we're used to seeing with all the jets.
I understand. Well, so tell us, where can people find you and find your book and so forth?
Well, of course, I'm definitely local. I work down at the George Manor here in Galveston. But book-wise, you can find it several places. Of course, online, there's lots of places you can find it. But locally, I always like to point people out to the Galveston Bookshop. Star Drug has it. Arlen's carries it. The Big House Antiques. Any of the Galveston Historic Foundation, retail outlets carry it. So there's quite a few places you can get the book. I think even Guido sells it too. So,
well, are you on social media?
I am on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I'm slowly getting more. I'm just not quite all there yet. So,
do you plan on any other books?
There are books in the works. So there are several that are in the brain. Just got to get them to fall out next. So.
Well, thank you so much, James. This is really interesting. And again, this ties into an artifact that is a unique artifact that they have here at the museum. So thanks for coming. And so many of the photos that you have in here are also from the museum. So that's really wonderful. Thank you.
They were a great resource.
Well, thanks again.
You're very welcome.
So fires have shaped townscapes, people's lives all throughout history. It really is an amazing story. James's book also includes several photographs from our museum's collection. They're from the 1915 storm when a fire broke out. So we always like to work with authors and museums and people doing research to help their projects as well.
Well, it's really amazing to think about what it would have been like, especially in the 1885 fire. The house that I grew up in, which is in the Lost Bayou district, it was so close to the house next door that we could jump from our porch to their porch. So when you think about that fire starting in the commercial district on the Strand and going all the way to the beachfront is really something. I'm glad we were able to connect this into an author and a story and a book and a wonderful artifact here on the museum. Books like this take a lot of time and research and a lot of resources that may not be just available on the internet with a quick search. So what types of materials for people working on a book or even a family history are available here at the Galveston County Museum?
Well, we have a lot available. So our museum is part of the Galveston County Historical Commission, and so we house their research library. So the Historical Commission members have worked on research for 50-something years. And so we have subject files where they've gathered articles and things. We have Texas history books that might be rare and hard to find. We have local history from around the county, all the communities around the county. And we have also the historical marker files. If you were to get a historical marker on your property, the files, the application, all of that research is in files that we have. So all of those things are available. And so if you're working on a project, it wouldn't hurt to stop by the museum, make an appointment with us, and we'll see what we have. We may have exactly what you're looking for because we also have our museum collection that we can refer to, not only our research library, but we can go into the artifacts and the archives and we can see, do we have a diary from a particular family member? Do we have several collections of family papers. And so if it's the family you're looking for, then you're going to have a treasure trove here. So give us, a chance to see if we can help you out on any research projects.
Well, now that we've learned about this interesting bucket, where can people see this at the museum and where are we located and all the good information?
Yeah, so the museum is located inside the county building that's at 722 Moody, which is also 21st Street. So we are free on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 to 4. We do private tours and we have our padlock mystery game that you can play on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you want to book something with us, go to our website or give us a call. The website's www.galvestoncountyhistory.org.
Thanks so much, Jodi. And if you haven't been, the Galveston County Museum, it's a treasure. There is so much within this small space that every time you come through, you're going to see something new. Join us next month for a new episode of Unboxing History. Please subscribe and comment about what you'd like to learn more about at the Galveston County Museum.